Most people grow up believing that family is the safest place in the world, that blood creates a bond, that brother or sister is a synonym for ally. But Carl Jung observed something that almost no one has the courage to admit out loud. You can share the same last name, the same roof, the same mother, and still be more of a stranger to your sibling than to the app driver who took you home yesterday. And it's not a failure of love. It's that love imposed by biology is not recognition. It's a contract. And an unconscious psychological contract doesn't generate intimacy. It generates obligation disguised as affection. You've probably felt this and swallowed it. That awkward silence at Sunday lunch. That feeling that you need to measure every word around those who, in theory, should know you better than anyone. That almost physical relief when the encounter ends and you close the car door. You call it stress, the daily rush, a difficult phase. Jung would call it something else. You are not with your family. You are with people who share your origin, but not your internal world. And those two things are not the same thing. They never were. There is a brutal difference between the genetic bond and the psychic bond, and this is where almost all family pain begins to make sense. The genetic bond is geography. It is a fact of birth. You ended up in the same womb, in the same house, hearing the same fights in the hallway, eating the same food at the same table. This builds shared memory, but shared memory is not a shared soul. Two children can grow up in the same room and develop two psychic universes that will never touch. One learns that the world is dangerous and closes off. The other learns that the world is a stage and shows off. One becomes an observer. The other becomes performative. And 20, 30, 40 years later, they sit at the same Christmas table and pretend they are still the children they once were. Except they aren't. They never were again. The psychic bond is something else. It doesn't ask for permission from blood. It happens when two people resonate at the same internal frequency, when you can say what you think without translating, without editing, without preparing yourself for a misunderstanding. It's when silence beside the other doesn't feel heavy. It's when you don't need to perform either your joy or your sadness. And most people spend their entire lives looking for this within the family because they were taught that it is the right place to look. And it isn't. Sometimes it is. Frequently it isn't. And the refusal to admit this is what keeps millions of people trapped in relationships that died decades ago, disguised as coexistence. It's not that you don't love your sibling. It's that loving someone doesn't mean having a psychic connection with that person. They are different layers. And when you confuse the two, you spend your life feeling guilty for not feeling what you should feel, when in reality the only thing wrong is the expectation. That is why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. Because this restlessness of feeling that something doesn't fit, even within your own family, is exactly the sign Jung described as the beginning of individuation. It isn't coldness, it isn't ingratitude, it is consciousness waking up. And consciousness without direction turns into paralysis, into rumination, into sleepless nights, trying to understand why you feel like an outsider in the place where you should feel at home. The Código do Despertar is an interior map based on the deep psychology of Carl Jung, with a daily lesson for 60 days featuring keys, questions and declarations that lead you from diffuse restlessness toward a clear direction. You read, execute the micro-action of the day, record it in your diary, and observe the structure of your internal life beginning to reorganize. The guide is in the first pinned comment of this video. If you feel the time has come to stop pretending everything is fine, comment below with just the word desperto. It is your first symbolic commitment to the truth you already know. Now come back with me, because the next layer is the one that sickens families the most and almost no one sees it. Roles. Every family is an invisible theater, and each child receives a character the moment they take their first breath. One is the strong one, the one who endures, who resolves, who cannot collapse. Another is the problematic one, the one who causes trouble, who worries everyone, who is talked about in low voices at parties. Another is the favorite, the one onto whom the parents projected their own unlived dream. And then there is the responsible one, the one who is always an adult before their time, who takes care of everyone and never learned to be cared for. These masks are not chosen. They are distributed. And the most perverse part is that they remain active 30, 40 years later, even when the people behind them have already become something completely different. You grow, you change, you heal, you go to therapy, you get married, you get divorced. You go through grief, you discover parts of yourself that your parents never knew existed. And then you go back to Sunday lunch, and in 15 minutes, you've become the problematic one again, or the strong one, or the responsible one. It's not that your siblings don't see you, it's that they relate to the mask you wore at 8 years old, because it was with that mask that the bond was built. And any attempt of yours to appear whole, as who you actually became, is read as strangeness, as being difficult, as you've changed too much. The phrase, "you've changed," coming from the mouth of a family member, is almost never a compliment. It is a complaint that you are no longer playing the role that made life easier for others. And then you have two choices: continue performing as the child who no longer exists to keep the peace, or accept that the price of authenticity is the discomfort of others. There is no third way. Jung was relentless on this. Either you are you or you are convenient, never both at the same time. And within this theatre, something even denser is born: comparison. Parents are rarely aware of the damage they do when they compare. That seemingly innocent phrase, "Why can't you be like your brother?" plants a seed that germinates for decades. Because the child who hears this doesn't understand the message as encouragement. They understand it as a sentence: "I am not enough the way I am." And so begins the silent race for attention, for approval, for recognition. One sibling becomes the mirror in which the other measures their own worth. And when the mirror reflects too much, envy is born. When it reflects too little, contempt is born. And both coexist with a polite smile on top, fulfilling the ritual of the united family, while inside they carry a 20-year resentment that was never named. That is when the shadow enters the scene, and the shadow is a merciless gear. Everything you had to swallow in childhood to be loved, everything you repressed so as not to be rejected, does not disappear. It goes to the basement of your psyche and leaks, and frequently it leaks precisely onto the sibling who had permission to live what you didn't. You repressed anger because you had to be the good kid, and now you hate the sibling who screams when they want to. You repressed ambition because you didn't want to outshine anyone, and now you despise the sibling who stood out. You repressed your body, your desire, your lightness, and now you judge the sibling who allows themselves those things. This isn't malice. This is the shadow in motion. And until you recognize that what bothers you in the other is what you denied in yourself, the bond will continue to be a battlefield where no one quite knows why they are fighting. And here is the point that hurts. This dynamic doesn't end when the parents die. It intensifies because the parents were the frame holding the theater together. Without them, the siblings face each other with their own projections, without the mediator. And that is why so many families explode during probate, during the division of assets, in disputes over ridiculous objects. No one is fighting over money. They are fighting for the love they felt was missing. They are collecting decades later that look the sibling received at dinner in 1987, and they didn't. It is tragic, it is infantile, and it is absolutely universal. Jung understood this better than anyone. The psyche has no sense of time. A childhood wound doesn't age. It only waits for the right moment to reenact itself. And it is exactly this kind of pattern that becomes what Jung called a family complex. A complex is an emotional knot, formed by layers of memory, pain, and automatic reaction, which activates without your consent. You don't decide to feel that tightness in your chest when your brother speaks in that specific tone. You don't decide to get irritated when your sister complains in that certain way. The complex decides for you. And what looks like an adult discussion about politics, about parenting, about money, about anything, is actually two children reenacting a script written 40 years ago, when no one knew what they were doing. You aren't fighting with your 45-year-old brother. You are fighting with the 7-year-old version of him who took your toy, and he is fighting with the 9-year-old version of you who got more praise from your father. And you will continue like this, indefinitely, until someone wakes up. And waking up hurts. The problem is that these complexes cross generations. The fight your mother had with her sister, you reproduce with yours. The pattern of exclusion your father had with his younger brother, you reproduce without even noticing. The family psyche is an underground river that runs beneath all generations, carrying the same sediments, the same resentments, the same undigested wounds. And as long as no one stops to look at this river, it continues to feed the same swamp. Individuation for Jung begins exactly here. At the moment when one person within the system decides to look head-on at what everyone else prefers to pretend doesn't exist. It is lonely. It is unpleasant. It is frequently misunderstood. But it is the only way to stop the cycle. And if you are feeling right now that this description is describing you with uncomfortable precision, that is no coincidence. It is recognition. And recognition is the first step. The Código do Despertar exists precisely to transform this recognition into practical direction day after day for 60 days, without you having to handle it all alone in your head. The guide is in the first pinned comment. Don't leave it for later. Later is how the psyche disguises as safety what is actually a fear of change. Now there are objective, almost clinical signs that the bond with a sibling has stopped being a bond and has become merely kinship by obligation. And it is important that you recognize these signs without romanticizing them, because romanticizing is the most elegant way to stay trapped. Sign 1. Conversations are superficial. You talk about the weather, traffic, work, the kids, but never about what truly moves the soul. Sign 2. Contact only exists on mandatory dates. Birthdays, Christmas, Mother's Day, some emergency. Outside of that, silence. Sign 3. You feel relief when the encounter ends. Not tiredness. Relief. Like someone leaving a business meeting. Sign 4. When you go through a real crisis, this person is not the first, nor the second, nor the third you think to reach out to. Sign 5. Thinking about calling spontaneously generates a strange sensation, as if you were intruding. And sign 6, perhaps the most revealing, you feel guilty for feeling all this, as if you were being a bad son, a bad sister, a bad person for perceiving the truth. You aren't. Guilt is not your moral compass. Guilt is the leash your inner child still wears so as not to disappoint the parents they thought they would lose if they told the truth. And when you understand this, the entire structure of the family theater begins to crack. Because the theater only works as long as everyone plays along. It only takes one person to stop memorizing the lines for the rest of the cast to panic. And their panic, curiously, is the proof that the play was never real. If it were real, it wouldn't collapse at a truth spoken in a low voice. And here deep psychology proposes something revolutionary. There is the family of origin, and there is the chosen family. And the two do not have to coincide. The chosen family is composed of people in front of whom you do not need to perform. It could be a friend of 20 years who knows you better than any cousin. It could be a partner with whom you laugh without editing the laughter. It could be a community, a group, a mentor, a therapist, someone you met as an adult and who recognized your internal world without needing a common last name. This is not a substitute. This is a complement, or in many cases, a course correction. Jung said that individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, and not who others expected you to be. And this process is impossible if you continue to invest all your psychic energy into maintaining relationships that require you to lie about yourself. The chosen family is not a betrayal of the biological family. It is oxygen. It is the place where you practice being whole so that you can later return to hostile environments without falling apart. And the more you develop these authentic bonds, the clearer it becomes how deficient the other bonds were. Not because they got worse, but because you finally know what you are comparing them to. And it is at this moment that the question changes. You stop asking, why is my family like this? And start asking, what do I choose to do knowing they are like this? That is an adult question. And an adult, for Jung, is not someone who has reached a certain age. It is someone who has stopped waiting for their parents and siblings to transform into what they never were, and has started building their own life with those who are actually available. It is a grieving process. It is a silent grief without a wake, without visible tears, because the people are still alive. But you are burying the fantasy. And it was the fantasy that was heavy, not reality. Reality, once accepted, sets you free. And it is exactly this turning point, between continuing to carry the fantasy of the ideal family and taking charge of your own life with maturity, that the Código do Despertar was built to cross with you. 60 days, 60 lessons, 60 opportunities to look at what you had been avoiding and transform it into consciousness, into boundaries, into decision. The guide remains in the first pinned comment. You don't need to start tomorrow. You need to start before the next family gathering sucks away another year of psychic energy that you won't get back. Decide now. Later is just a synonym for fear well dressed. And we come to the most delicate point, the one that requires the most courage, abandoning guilt, establishing boundaries, choosing real bonds, even when that implies reducing the intensity of imposed bonds. Culture taught you that loving a sibling is an obligation. Jung taught that loving without consciousness is servitude, and there is an abyssal difference between the two. You don't need to hate anyone. You don't need to cut anyone off dramatically. You don't need to send a 10-minute audio message explaining your reasons. You simply need to stop offering yourself as fuel for relationships that only consume you. This might mean decreasing the frequency of contact. It might mean not going to every event. It might mean responding with a short sentence instead of embarking on the same old argument. It might mean accepting a cordial and distant coexistence without the script of the united family that never existed. And it will hurt. It will hurt at first because the child inside you still wants the approval that never came. It will hurt because others will call you cold, changed, a snob, ungrateful. But Jung understood something cruel. Most people call you cold when you stop warming yourself in your own flames so they can have heat. You didn't become cold, you stopped burning yourself up, and those who benefited from your internal fire will complain. This is a sign that you are on the right path, not the wrong one. Emotional maturity is not the absence of family ties. It is the capacity to keep those ties at the size and temperature that reality allows, without lying to yourself that it is more than it is. Some siblings will continue to be just, cordial relatives, and that's fine. Others, over time and with serious inner work, may become true friends in adult life when the masks of childhood finally fall away, and that's fine too. What cannot continue is you living your entire life as if the bond should be a certain way just because you were born in the same place. That is emotional infantilism disguised as family values. And emotional infantilism, maintained for decades, is one of the most silent causes of adult depression that exists. You sicken inside trying to be loyal to a contract you never read and never signed. So here is the point where you sit down with yourself. You can close this video, go back to next Sunday's lunch, put on the old mask, swallow another painful phrase, smile at another comparison, and postpone for another year this conversation you need to have first with yourself before having it with anyone else. Or you can accept what Jung placed in front of you now. Blood does not manufacture a common soul. Coexistence does not manufacture intimacy. Obligation does not manufacture love. And pretending otherwise is the highest price an adult can pay for the illusion of belonging. The illusion is over. The first comment is pinned and the next step is yours. Choose.